Hello, once again. This is Pastor Andrew Gukin from Rochester, New York, here with Pastor Jeff Stieber from Ohio.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Yeah, it is. This is our second video, and it seems there's some reaction to our last video, some comments. So this week we're going to somewhat continue what we talked about last week, which was just the sacrament of communion sort of in general. But this week we're going to get into a conversation about the sacrament of Holy Communion amidst the COVID-19 pandemic and potentially what that could mean for not only our individual churches, but the ELCA churches across the country, and actually, as my experience has been, all Christian churches around us and how we approach that. So, with that, we're going to try and limit it to 15 minutes, but if we go over that, then that means we'll have part 2 or 3, because as many of you may know, pastors like to talk, and that just happens. So, I don't know, Jeff, what has been your experience with maybe people contacting you, or maybe some of your thoughts on what communion is like in the midst of, this social separation and not having worship in person?
I would say that I think most the people in my setting, so we do not, just to put it out there, so we have taken the approach, and I think our entire synod, the Northeast Ohio Synod that I'm a part of, has taken the approach of not doing virtual communion, not trying to figure out a way to, put wafers or small cups into plastic bins and then have people try to figure out a way to do that, receive them. And I think most of our congregation is okay with that, of abstaining from the sacrament for this period of time, because we're obviously, for the reason we're doing it, for the health reason. However, that's been easier for us to do as we've been separated, as we haven't been able to be together. Just to say no virtual communion, it's not just me in front of a camera, whether it's my phone or a computer, and saying the words of institution, and then everybody at home, kind of doing it that way. We've said we're not doing that, but it's going to get more difficult to discern when we come back together. Even though it's not, like I said, it's not too horrible now, but it's going to be more difficult to discern when we get back together, to say, all right, how do we do this? And what are, I guess, something that I think is important about this is this issue is not something simple as to say it's either yes or no. We have it or we don't have it. We have virtual communion or we don't have it. I think any decision that goes into the practice of the celebration of communion, of the sacrament, that there's a lot of layers to it and a lot of things that have to be taken into consideration before something is chosen. So that was my long answer to say, I think people are doing okay with it. There hasn't been any arguments or people saying we really, really want this. But I think if I were to poll the congregation, I think there probably would be a variety of input of, this is what I think we could do. I mean, so like if you were to say to your congregation, hey, I'm thinking about, or would you like me to say the words of institution from the sanctuary as we record the service and then everybody communes at home? I'm thinking about doing that. Would you like me to do that? Do you think that would receive a positive response? People would want to be able to commune in their home virtually? Or do you think they would say, nah, I don't know if we're that comfortable with it?
I think, well, first, yeah, just quickly answer that, and then I'll go into a little more. I think if I were to ask my congregation that, I would get people on both sides. And then people would be like, yeah, whatever you want to do. So,
Right.
yeah. But yeah, another thing I want to say before we go further is like, this is
Yeah.
just for anyone that would be watching, this is just a discussion. You know, I mean, we're not going to be looking at what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do. It's really going to be just a discussion of, you know, here's things we need to think about. Not only now while we're still not worshiping together, but also when we start to come back together, as you alluded to already.
Yeah.
There's been, so with that said, in our synod as well, there's been a major discussion on, well, what is it going to look like when we come back together? But then also, and this sounds repetitive, I guess, also, why do we or do we not do virtual communion? And I mean, people just like kind of this video, I mean, people are all over the spectrum with that. And, you know, and I personally, we're not doing it either. We're not doing a virtual communion, but I know some of my peers are doing it. And what it comes down to for us as leaders, you know, simply from our training and everything, and, you know, background of Lutheran theology and trying to understand our Lutheran identity, you know, from what I've heard and what I believe, which, you know, I mean, it ebbs and flows because, I mean, the world is changing constantly. I don't feel comfortable doing that based on how we as Lutherans understand the sacrament of communion. Because several questions, but one of the questions is, do we have virtual communion? And so I'm standing there on a screen, and let's say 100 people are watching, be it live stream or as we do here, you know, I record and put it on a YouTube channel.
Right.
Me standing there over the wafer and wine, is me saying those words, consecrating the elements, or are those elements consecrated because we are gathered in the flesh, so in person as a congregation, celebrating that together, hence communal communion. You know, and Luther, it seems, understood that, even though, of course, he didn't have the internet and virtual means, he understood that that is what is a major part of what makes communion and the remembrance that we celebrate communion. It makes, you know, and another thing to think about, you know, where I think Bishop Eaton, the presiding bishop, said at one point, maybe it was the end of March, she didn't like come out and say, don't do virtual communion.
Yeah.
But she said, kind of, yeah, I would highly suggest you not do that.
Yeah. Yeah. We won't remove you from your church if you do it.
Yeah.
But, you know, we will remember that you did it. And if anything else comes up, we'll be like, hey, you already had this against you. Yeah. And I think that's part of, because it's part of our polity or governance of not handing down mandates of you have to follow these certain things. But still trying to have some sense of uniformity to our denomination, to our tradition and our faith. Say, like you said, we really would highly advise against it. But we understand that there could be an exception. I don't know if you know this, and if you don't, somebody maybe who watches will look it up. Maybe I'll look it up later if I'm feeling curious. Is something when you talk about Luther's understanding of it and not having, you know, the internet and everything. I've never looked in to see when Luther was hidden away in the castle, you know, when he was kidnapped by his supporters, his friends, and hidden away, and he did all the translating and all that great stuff. I don't know if he was going to church during that time. I don't know if he was privately going to a church. I don't know if he was then therefore celebrating the sacraments, or if he during those months was completely in solitude and therefore not doing those things. I mean, that would maybe even give some insight as to, this is what a person might do. If we wanted a strict guideline, I don't think we need it, but it would be interesting.
Yeah, and I might be pulling this from the air, but I don't know the answer to that. But
Yeah.
what I would want to say to that is, in that case, it's a bit, well, yeah.
Is isolation just isolation, or is there different types of isolation?
Well, see, that gets into a whole other question, because at that time, there wasn't necessarily what we would call Lutheranism, but I mean, it was moving that way. I can't remember in the timeline if he'd already been excommunicated. I think so. So then does that mean, gosh, that's really complicated, because what I'd want to say to that is, it doesn't matter for him because he was a priest. So
right.
he could
commune himself.
He could commune himself.
Right.
But,
But do you do that? Do you go like, all right, everybody, I know we're not celebrating virtual communion, we're not getting together, but just so you know, as for me, Katie, Alex, and Emily, we're having communion at our house every week because I can do that as a pastor? Or do you go, no, we don't do that. Or even if you were, a pastor who wasn't married, didn't have kids, even though you can celebrate it, do you think you would celebrate it on your own?
Okay, so...
Or would you feel like there has to be somebody else there?
So my answer to that would be, I don't sit here in my office, like now especially, because, I mean, I haven't had communion since, March.
Yeah.
And, I mean, this is a struggle for me too. But I don't sit here in my office and like, well, I haven't had it in a while, so, well, even though no one else is here, I'm going to do it.
I got the wafers and wine over there.
Yeah, I'm like, well, I can just go get those. No, see, I'm not doing that. But see, I keep looking down because there's been all these videos of different bishops and talking about coming back together, which we might talk about just the risks of what community will look like when we get back together. But I have all these notes.
If you have the answer, just tell us. We can end this video now if you have the answer in front of you.
No, but there was a bishop that talked about, I guess, the way I understood, he was actually I think he was actually in Rome. That doesn't make sense. But the way that I think he was in Rome for Easter. I don't know how that's possible with like the travel restrictions. But the way that he talked about it in this video is that there was the Pope was celebrating the Eucharist. And of course that's televised. Right. And 40 people like spread out in there. And, and he said, that was a powerful thing because I was able to commune with them. He goes, I was able to commune with them and him, the Pope, and the 39 other people in the
basilica or whatever.
The basilica. Yeah. So I'm like, so he was there. But the thing is, the Pope was the only one that partook of the
elements. Yeah.
So, I think about, this is a long answer. See, that's what I'm talking about.
All right. So keep thinking about it. We're just about to hit our 15-minute mark.
Okay.
And so I think that's a good place for, maybe that's a good suspense, a cliffhanger, if you will, to see how we're going to fumble through this. But just the idea that maybe it's coming at the heart of this is we know that God can do anything. We know that it's possible. Yes. And therefore we could have virtual communion. We could do all of these things. But part of it then comes down to really how do we view it, and what does it mean for us as Lutherans to take communion together, or by ourselves.
Yeah. So let me just.
You're gonna.
No, let me
Good,
just.
good.
Let me just
No,
conclude.
you
Let me just conclude this episode, kind of piggybacking on that. The question is, yes, God can do anything. So virtual communion, what have you, God can do that. That's happening. But the question is, should we be doing it?
Ah. Ooh. Oh. Ooh.
So there we go. So until next time.
Until next time, which I'll be wearing the same shirt, just so you know.
Me too.